Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, guys. Wherever you are in the world, you are tuning into the O Show, and I am your host, Oren McCurry. The O Show is a no-nonsense podcast where I aim to bring you the best advice on training, mindset, and nutrition to supercharge your efforts in the gym, the kitchen, and most importantly, in your head. Let's get to it. Hey guys, welcome to today's episode of the O Show, and today we have on a Perth resident, Jackson Peos, who is a PhD researcher studying a lot of really cool stuff around intermittent dieting strategies at UWA. Jackson, welcome to the podcast.
Thanks for having me, dude.
It's something that it's really exciting seeing somebody from Perth doing this stuff and getting the recognition that you are on a global scale and the names that you sort of liaise with on a regular basis, like Liam Norton and Eric Helms and people like that. And it's really, really cool seeing somebody who's a local guy who's putting out such quality content that it's getting noticed, mate. So that's why I wanted to get you on the podcast. Obviously, we've known each other in circles for a while, but it's good to have a chat. And we'll start with some sort of silly stuff before we get into the serious stuff. So what's your favorite color?
Black,
nice.
What's like my soul. No.
Black like your soul. What about cats or dogs? What do you prefer?
Dogs, 100%.
Who's your favorite anime character? I know you're a big anime fan.
Naruto.
And what about Marvel? Who's the best Marvel character?
In the comics, it would be Hulk, but I absolutely detest the Hulk in the cinematic universe.
Yeah, okay. So who's your favorite in the cinematic universe then?
Black Panther.
Oh yeah, pretty cool. Not a common choice from a lot of people, so that's quite interesting, mate. Yeah. I'll have to include that question in future podcasts now. So, right, final one, mate. What's your stripper names? Your first pet, if you've ever had a pet, plus the first street you lived on is your stripper name.
That would be Bronte Parramatta. That's just not sexy. That's just not sexy at all.
I mean, it depends. Some people might find that sexy. Man, that's killer. So that's broke the ice a little bit. People have got to know your personality a little bit with that. So, and they also know your stripper name if you ever decide to get up on the pole. So that's good.
Or if the PhD falls through, you never know.
That's it, mate. You never know, exactly. So, mate, let's talk about your journey. Like, what made you get into fitness in the first place? I know you do a bit of coaching as well, plus the research side. How did you get into that, and why is research such a big passion for you?
Yeah, so before I got into any of the studies, I just loved sport. I was playing sport my whole life. I played football from a very early age, playing up to waffle level, which is our state league below AFL. So I was playing semi-professionally with football up until I was 21. During that time, I was also a competitive roller for the school, and I went to a private school. So rowing is almost as important as how well you do in your exams to some degree, in regards to how well it's sort of respected at the school. So rowing was insane, and I was captain of boats of the rowing squad in year 12, and I led our first 8 to the head of the river, and I had a little go with some of the state rowing post school as well. So I've been involved in sport quite heavily, and in the last sort of my early adult years, sort of maybe 17 to sort of 21, while I was competing in sport, I started lifting weights, not with the intention to get big, but just to sort of complement or to improve my strength and endurance in either football or rowing. And sort of after the first couple of years, I responded quite well, and I wasn't doing anything certainly wasn't bodybuilding style training, and it was certainly far from optimal in terms of maximizing the muscle growth response. But I still responded quite well and put on a pretty good amount of muscle fairly quickly, and I liked what that looked like. And so I sort of fell in love to some degree with lifting weights as well while I was playing sports. And then while I was playing waffle, it's very intense training regime, training 3 hours a night, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, with full day Saturday games once you're there for the Colts reserves. Then the league play, and then you have presentations afterwards, plus a Sunday recovery morning. It's almost like a full part-time job, and you're only really getting paid $250 a game for what feels like a part-time job. It was a massive time investment. And I sort of got to the point when I was around 21 that I knew I wasn't going to play AFL. And that's when I sort of said, okay, well, playing WAFL is probably not too worth it in terms of the cost versus the benefits. So I decided to just push with just lifting weights and see how I would go with that. I competed in natural bodybuilding, won my first show, and then a year and a half later, continued lifting weights and competed in the IFBB for a couple of seasons, a couple of second places in the state shows, a fourth place at nationals. So doing okay, not great. And sort of during all that time, while I was sort of trying to get as big and strong as I possibly could, I sort of just found myself gravitating to a lot of reading in terms of how can I make this process the most efficient as I possibly can. And the answer is by following evidence-based practices. So before I was even in university, I was already sort of looking at the science and testing different scientific concepts for how can I get some small edges on my nutrition or my weight training and things like that. So I had a love with getting bigger, faster and stronger, and the scientific method or process to achieve that. So I started my university studies at UWA with an undergrad degree. I double majored in sports science and exercise and health. Did quite well in those while I was sort of training away in the bodybuilding. I got offered a position to complete my honours degree, which specialised in exercise physiology, and that's sort of just a 1-year introduction to research degree. And that during that year was when I sort of decided that I was really going to get stuck into the nutrition side of things, and that I felt that I could have a career in research and be one of these people, instead of just sort of reading the science and sort of interpreting it to benefit your own sort of performance and progress. I instead wanted to be someone that could put out that sort of information and sort of help athletes to be bigger, faster and stronger. So I did well in my honours degree, offered a scholarship position to complete my PhD. And I was totally set on specialising in nutrition, which was a tough gig because in Perth, we just don't have much nutrition science going on, specifically nutrition science for athletes. It's quite easy to do nutrition science for obesity and treating diabetes and things like that because the funding is quite easy to get. But running studies on athletes just doesn't really happen that much because there's no one to pay for the studies, in essence. And then people seem to have this misconception that like studies, you can just come up with a study and then run them out of the university. But every DEXA scan, every blood test, every resting metabolic rate test costs money, and somebody's going to pay for it. And I'm not going to pay for it because it's thousands and thousands of dollars. And the university, they pay a little bit, but then they certainly don't pay enough to sort of run well-controlled studies. And that means you're sort of left to find external funding. So it was tough in the beginning because I sort of had these wild plans with all these different studies that I wanted to carry out, but not really any money to do it. But I was lucky to get some support from Renaissance Periodization over in the States with Mike Israetel, Sports Nutrition Australia, JPS Health and Fitness. They sort of came on board, provided some support and some funding, and that's what's allowed me to sort of run some of these studies, which I think can really benefit the health and fitness industry and athletes as a whole. So that's pretty much where I am today.
Yeah, man, great introduction and very, very background, and that gives everyone a lot of detail into exactly what you're doing now in terms of the university stuff and what actually goes into a study. And generating the funding, and that's something that a lot of people won't actually realize. So that's key for people, mate. Now, a lot of the research you do ties into body composition goals in like physique competitors and using different intermittent dieting strategies. So for the person who doesn't know the difference, can you just explain what the difference is between a refeed and a diet break?
Yeah, so I've got to step back. So the traditional method of dieting is what we call continuous energy restriction. And that's just basically you're in a calorie deficit or an energy deficit every day for the duration of the weight loss phase. And that's typically the standard approach. Now we have this newer approach called intermittent dieting. And intermittent dieting includes things like refeeds and diet breaks. And intermittent dieting as a definition is a cyclical nature or an alternating between periods of calorie restriction and periods of energy balance. Now, energy balance means you're eating at least enough to maintain your body weight, so you're not in a deficit anymore. Now, we can achieve energy balance by either doing a refeed or a diet break. Now, the difference between the two is generally the duration and frequency. So refeeds are usually anywhere between 1 to 3 days long, and they'll usually happen every 1 to 2 weeks. Whereas in contrast, diet breaks, they're a little bit longer, usually sort of 1 to 2 weeks long, and they'll happen anywhere between every sort of 2 to 8 weeks. So it's basically just the duration and the frequency of them. The calorie intake's usually relatively similar between the two.
Okay, cool. And that's quite interesting because a lot of people who are listening will just know that one style of diet in terms of the linear diet, and where over time calories get dropped and activity goes up, and that's the only thing they've ever known or tried. So just by doing this, hopefully we're introducing people to that intermittent diet and strategy, whether they are a gym pop person or a coach who employs either. So I think it's a super interesting topic, mate. So diet breaks are quite new to the industry versus refeeds, and refeeds has probably been studied a little bit more than like a full week or two dieting break like you're suggesting. In terms of the science that exists with refeeds, what's the science currently saying is effective with a refeed versus ineffective, and is it a physiological versus a psychological benefit that we really get from a refeed?
So you say there's been a lot of, there's been more research on refeeds. There really hasn't. And I think this is a major misconception in the fitness industry. And the misconception is that refeeds are an evidence-based practice. They're just not. Okay. They are not. Up until 3 months ago, we'd never, ever had a refeed study completed. And it's just, people like to say, oh, refeeds are good for increasing metabolic rate and sort of increasing leptin levels, and this is going to make you sort of feel more satiated and better able to manage hunger. But we just don't have the data. And it bothers me a lot because people talk like refeeds are the holy grail secret to optimal weight loss, but we just haven't studied it yet. And now the study that I referred to that happened 3 months ago, that used a model of dieting that would be most similar to what sort of I'd say would be used by bodybuilders and people in this industry. And that was diet for 5 days, and then Saturday and Sunday have your refeed where you increase your calories to maintenance via increasing carbohydrate intake, and you just cycle that for the weight loss phase. And they compared that to just dieting straight all week, and each group went for 7 weeks long. Now, the group that had the refeeds, they didn't better maintain their resting metabolic rate, and they didn't better maintain fat-free mass. They did slightly maintain better dry fat-free mass, but I have issues with the timing of the measurement because they measured the refeed group 2 days post their refeed. Now, obviously some glycogen retention and restoration is going to happen as a result of the refeed. And what I'm thinking is this better dry fat-free mass retention that they're talking about is just a result of the acute sort of storage of glycogen that's happening from the high carbohydrate refeed. I don't think it's actually a result of more muscle maintenance, which is what the athletes actually care about. so that's really the only study that we have that's looked at refeeds in a training population, and people might be quite surprised with that because they see everyone talking about how great refeeds are, but we really just don't know. And like that anecdotal support is pretty good, but in terms of controlled scientific studies, we just don't have them. Now, diet breaks that I would agree that I would actually say they've been studied to the same degree as refeeds in a way. I don't think there's more evidence for refeeds or more evidence for diet breaks either way. We had a study published a couple of years back which used 2-week diet breaks after every 2 weeks of dieting. And they compared that to a group who just dieted straight, and the weight loss phase was 16 weeks long. And what they did see was that doing these 2-week diet breaks, the diet break group lost more fat, they maintained their resting metabolic rate to a higher level, and they didn't regain as much weight and fat post-diet. So from the research that we do have, if we were going to say that one or the other is better, there's more evidence suggesting the benefits of diet breaks as opposed to the benefits of refeeds. And I guess that's logical on face value because you can think, okay, maybe 48 hours in maintenance isn't enough to cause like significant restoration in some of these hormonal markers and some of these things that influence metabolic rate and things like that. Whereas if we take them to sort of 7 to 14 days in energy balance, maybe that's enough of a signal to sort of send a message to the body like, okay, energy availability isn't so low. We can start sort of normalizing some of these things that have been basically bashed during the deficit period. Now, that study that used the 2-week diet breaks, that was far from ideal macronutrient splits, and it was in overweight, obese people who weren't training. So it's fairly limited what we can make from that study, which is why I wanted to basically tweak that study, put it in a resistance trained athlete population. And instead of doing 2-week diet breaks after every 2 weeks of dieting, because that doubles the length of the weight loss intervention, it makes it super, super fucking long. So instead of that, I decided to diet them for 3 weeks straight and then have a 1-week diet break. And to see if we could see the same sort of benefits in like better maintenance of metabolic rate, better maintenance or better fat loss or better maintenance of fat-free mass or anything like that. Now, I am analyzing that data at the moment, and the general trends that I'm looking at so far are quite surprising, and it's probably the findings are probably don't sit in line with what most people in the industry think is going to happen. For example, it doesn't seem like the diet breaks are preventing sort of metabolic downregulation to any great degree. It doesn't seem like they're allowing the intermittent diet group to maintain a better sort of hormonal position. It doesn't look like it's allowing them to better maintain their fat-free mass. So all those things that people sort of promote with regards to refeeds and diet breaks don't really seem to hold up just yet. But that's absolutely not to say that I don't think diet breaks or refeeds have any value, because what I have seen in my study is that when we look at hunger scores and appetite scores, hunger just seems to be a whole lot lower in the diet break group compared to the continuous dieting group. And I complement that with the observation that double the amount of people who dropped out from the diet break group dropped out from the continuous group. So we had something like four people drop out from the diet break group, but we had like 9 drop out from the continuous dieting group, which makes me think that, hey, maybe diet breaks are doing something to allow easier hunger management or just to sort of suppress some of the appetite and things like that. And that's allowing the person to stick to the program a little bit easier. Whereas we compare that to the guys in the continuous group who aren't getting any diet breaks, it looks like hunger just spirals straight up, and that might make the program just super difficult for them to stick to. And then they say, fuck, this is too hard, I'm out, sort of thing. Now that's a big finding, because even if diet breaks don't enhance fat loss or they don't enhance metabolic rate, or they don't release leptin or anything like that, it doesn't really matter if the person can't sort of stick to the program. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
So if diet breaks are allowing an easier method of weight and fat loss, that has huge practical application, because the most perfect dietary protocol is useless if no one can follow it. So the finding that we might have a dietary approach that's easier to stick to than the standard traditional approach has a lot of value for sort of improving the ease to which people can lose the weight and lose the fat. Now, I have seen some other kind of cool trends and findings. It looks like irritability is a lot lower in the diet break group. Now, that could be a result of the hunger. Maybe because the continuous group, their hunger was so high all the time, that's caused them to sort of just be shitty more of the time. Whereas it seems like the intermittent group, the irritability is a lot lower, their alertness was scored higher, and their hunger is lower. So they could sort of be interconnected and intertwined, but it does look sort of overall that there's a more positive psychological state in the diet break group, which I think has a lot of value for coaches like us trying to use these things in practice. I also noticed that diet breaks, we measured performance immediately pre and immediately post diet break, and it looks like muscle endurance increases quite notably as a result of the diet break. It doesn't last too long. It's only a sort of a short-term increase, but that gives me the idea that there could be some merit for athletes to synchronize their diet breaks with their highest volume training sessions, where they might sort of need that little bit of extra endurance to push harder for longer, sort of, let's say in their last week before a deload or something like that. Or if we want to say outside the weights room, let's say we've got like a power, that's in the weights room, but like a sprinter, powerlifters as well. They often have testing weeks, sort of happen every few months, where they'll just go pretty close to max to see how they're actually tracking. Now, diet break could be a great time to sort of synchronize with those testing weeks to give you the ability to sort of perform slightly more optimally, while not sort of impairing the fat or the weight loss. So, yeah, the findings are a little bit upside down. I think definitely they're going to surprise a lot of people when this stuff gets published, and it's probably going to change the thought process for a lot of people. But it doesn't mean that these intermittent dieting strategies have no value. It's just the value that I think some people associated with them, like the hormonal benefits and the metabolic rate benefits, they don't seem to be as evident as we originally thought.
Yeah, that's fair, man. That's a good sum up, mate. You pretty much answered every question I had about what you'd find there. But I think as a coach, mate, that's very beneficial, because whether it's Gen Pop or comp prep clients or athletes, anything we can do to make somebody more compliant and more able to sustain their efforts in dieting, then it's massively beneficial. So even if it's not in terms of the hormonal benefits and increased fat loss, just the fact that, double the amount of people dropped out of a linear diet shows that this is something that probably coaches, and even if somebody's coaching themselves, should implement moving forward.
Big time, dude. Big time. I agree.
And in terms of, I know obviously you do a lot of coaching yourself, and you had athletes at the last IFBB. I think that was Arnold. Yeah, Arnold's. I can't even remember where we're sitting at in the year now. Was it Arnold's or was it? Yeah. Did you have Rachel in the Arnold's this year, or was that season B last year?
That would have been season B last year. Okay. I had Jordan in Arnold's this year.
Yeah. So with competitors like that, what sort of structure? I know you mentioned that some of the studies do a 2 week on, 2 week off with diet breaks. If you were putting a diet break strategy in with a competitor like that, would you do the 3-in-1 like what you're doing currently in your research, or would you tweak it a bit, or would you just throw them in depending on the feedback you're getting on a check-in?
It sort of depends a little bit. So if the clients come to you with a bunch of time before the show, like they come to you like 25 weeks out or something like that, and you've got plenty of time up your sleeve, then that's a good opportunity to be using these diet breaks. Now, although they're probably not going to enhance the fat loss, or they're not going to sort of allow you to maintain a higher metabolic rate or anything like that, as we said, it might just make the overall program a little bit easier to stick to, might allow them to maintain a more positive mood state, and just sort of manage that hunger a little bit better. So if you've got the time up your sleeve, I think that they do have value. With Jordan's recent prep, and he got, that's Jordan Madashi. If anyone wants to look at how shredded he got,
that was insane.
We did use 1 week diet breaks after every 3 weeks of dieting. But we only really did that for up until about 9 weeks out. We did that. So we went with that protocol, and it was like a pre-planned protocol. And I think the pre-planned protocol sometimes helps, because when the athlete knows when the diet break's coming, when they start getting to sort of week 2 of that deficit, or maybe early in week 3 of that deficit, and things start sucking a little bit, and the energy's taking a hit, and the hunger is sort of coming up a bit, they can sort of hang on, because they know that sort of, I've just got to fucking knuckle down for 7 days, and then those carbs are going to come back in. I'll recharge the batteries a little bit. Whereas if you don't really tell them when the diet breaks are coming, I feel like it might lose some of the adherence value, because all of a sudden you're 20 weeks out with a client. They don't know when or if they're having a diet break. And when things get sucky, they don't have that short-term sort of goal that they can work to it. It's going to get super overwhelming, because they're thinking, holy fuck, 18 more weeks of this shit. Whereas if they only have to look a maximum of like 21 days ahead, that can be a lot easier to manage and mentally process. So I tend to prefer to go with the like more sort of preemptive arrangement of diet breaks, just so they know that they're coming, and then I think it sort of facilitates that adherence during the dieting periods. But inside 9 weeks out, I play it a bit more conservative, because 1 week diet breaks they're quite a long time, and fat loss isn't happening in those times. They're basically just sort of chuck the car into neutral and coast along for a little bit. You're not really improving. Like, yes, like food comes up, improve the psyche, might have some better training, but you're not really getting closer to your goal during that diet break week. So instead of having those full week-long diet breaks, I just switch to the 2 and single day refeeds from like when we're in close proximity to the show. And that's not because I think that refeeds are going to sort of spike his metabolism or replenish his hormone profile or anything like that. It's just purely a psychological thing, where they know I've only got to dig for 6 days, and then I get that little top up. As opposed to, I got 9 weeks before the show. Fuck, I already feel shit, and like I'm so depleted. There's no way I'm going to be able to do sort of nine more weeks of this shit. But if they only have to ever look 6 days ahead or 5 days ahead, it just becomes a whole lot more manageable.
Yeah, and that's fair. And that's good way, like you said, to implement both and have the diet breaks a bit further out, when you maybe need to have more of a bang for your buck right at the start, and then let them, like you said, put the car in neutral for a bit and just chill for those weeks. It increases adherence to the plan. And then whenever it gets proper crunch time and you've got to make sure you're maximizing every week, then you're being a bit more strict with it and using just like those refeed days on the weekends if needed. So that's awesome. That's a lot into your research and how people can implement this stuff. The one other topic that I wanted to talk to you about is supplements, because you've been quite outspoken in the past about certain supplements and certain things being illogical or not researched.
The supplement company that won't be named that just got fined $400,000.
That company.
We won't get into that.
No, but people can obviously follow you. I'll put all the links in the show notes. But if they want to find out, they can easily scroll back and find it. Now, you obviously do believe in some supplements, because you're one of the advisors for Bulk Nutrients, isn't that right?
Yep.
So you do believe in some supplements, and I know a lot of people listening to this, whether they're coaches or Gen Pop or competitors, people like to take supplements. So let's dispel some myths on what's good and what's bad, or even if you just want to go into what's actually research backed in terms of bang for their buck, if they do want to go to Supplement Mart or Massive Joe's and buy some supplements.
Yeah, well, if we wanted to just talk about all the things that are bad, we could have a 3-hour podcast. So we'll stick to the things that work. And to be honest, it's quite a short list. Honestly, now for 99% of the people that I work with, creatine monohydrate will be a staple. That is the most scientifically backed supplement out there by far. It will notably improve your ability to execute repeated high intensity efforts. So that doesn't matter if you're in the weights room or on the football field doing sprints or a sprinter. It doesn't matter. If you're doing any form of high intensity bursts, then you're going to be relying on the phosphocreatine energy system.
Mm-hmm.
And you can increase basically the fuel depot of that fuel reserve by supplementing with creatine. Basically, it allows you more circulating creatine to bind with the phosphate molecules to make this little packet of energy that can quickly be hydrolyzed and broken apart to allow you to sort of pump out these high intensity efforts. Now, when you look at studies, this can lead to extra reps performed in the gym, extra strength, faster repeat sprint efforts, faster cycling time trials, Wingate tests, all sorts of things. Now, it's very notable performance improvements. Now, for the bros, anything that's going to improve your performance in that way is by definition going to improve your adaptations and therefore sort of your muscle size as well. So yeah, creatine is hugely beneficial, and you'd have a tough case to justify why you wouldn't be using creatine if you're a high performing athlete, I think. The next one, I guess we'll call it protein supplements. Whey and casein are pretty, I often prescribe them, mostly for like when you're working with, this is more so for sports athletes, like the bodybuilders, they usually have their protein intakes down pat. They're consuming like 5, 6, 7 protein feedings per day. Like the protein supplements just aren't that important for those guys. They're already getting ample protein intake. Putting supplements on top of that's probably not going to give them much. But for some of the other athletes that I work with, like boxers, cyclists, MMA fighters, they have like 3 meals a day, you know what I mean? And often they are undershooting their protein in a big way. They're not eating like bodybuilders. So for guys like that, chucking in a whey shake sort of in the morning or post-training or something like that, that can increase their protein intake by anywhere between sort of 25 to 40%, which can take them all of a sudden from a suboptimal protein intake to an optimal protein intake. And once that happens, all of a sudden they just notice they're recovering better and they sort of getting more progress in the gym and sort of more muscle gain progress and things like that. So for guys who are undershooting their protein, which is very, very common in sports athletes, adding whey protein shakes is really good for them. Casein is really good. I think it's probably still undervalued, even in the bodybuilding community. It seemed like a few years ago, everyone was like, fuck yeah, casein and cottage cheese before bed. But it seems like there's been like a shift away and people don't think it's so important. But there's been a solid couple of studies recently, which have even surprised me. And they've shown like notable benefits to consuming like a slow digesting pre-bed protein. And the benefits are being caused by, I think, basically because these are slow releasing proteins, it's allowing you to maintain a level of amino acidemia, so high levels of amino acids in the blood for a longer period of time. And it's just going to prevent you from remaining in a state of very low blood amino acids for a long period of time, like you're sleeping. And I just think that potentially, if you're not having a pre-bed protein and maybe even not a slow digesting pre-bed protein, I think there's more potential for sort of somewhere mid-sleep. You've just got really low levels of amino acids sitting in the blood, and that's when you can sort of slip into negative protein balance or catabolism for a short period of time. And I just think this is not the holy grail, and it's not going to make you jacked in 3 months or anything like that. But I think it might be able to add a 1 to 5% edge. And I just think those slow digesting proteins like casein can just allow you to sort of maintain a positive protein balance state during sleep, without allowing those sort of blood amino acids to dip to a level that might risk sort of catabolism. So yeah, that's sort of my take on protein supplements. But yeah, the big ones, protein supplements just aren't really needed if you're already getting sort of 2 grams of protein per kilo of body weight from whole food sources. But for many athletes, they're not getting that. For my endurance guys, I'll recommend beta-alanine. That is basically a buffering agent. So it increases levels of muscle carnosine, and carnosine is the buffer. So when we do high fatiguing training, we release hydrogen ions, which sort of separate from the lactic acid that's released. And what carnosine does is it goes and buffers those hydrogen ions, which basically reduces our fatigue and allows us to push a little bit harder for longer before that fatigue really kicks in and our performance dips. So if you're performing efforts sort of from 1 to 4 minutes of really high intensity, that seems like what beta-alanine can really benefit those sort of activities. Probably not going to help bodybuilders too much unless you're training in like the 25 rep range plus. I have seen a couple of studies with those really high rep ranges where beta-alanine was able to allow them to basically add on a couple of extra reps than they would otherwise, because when you're doing really high reps, it's not sort of your muscle strength that sort of kicks out that stops the set. It's that sort of overaccumulation of hydrogen ions that are so fatiguing, and that really burning sensation that sort of causes the set to end. So yeah, beta-alanine, really good for endurance athletes, at least sort of 1 to 4 minute sort of activities that have that really high burning sensation. If you're doing an activity and you get really high burn, beta-alanine is probably going to help you. There's a big misconception that the beta-alanine is like a pre-workout drink. It's just not. It needs to be loaded chronically. So it needs to be taken 7 days straight before it really actually does anything. So that tingling sensation that you get in your face, that does not mean that the beta-alanine is working, which is, I know, so stupid because it's always in pre-workout supplements. And people like have their fucking scoop of pre-workout and they're like, oh, here comes the tingles, we're ready to roll now. Like, that's not beta-alanine doing its thing. So beta-alanine needs to be loaded chronically and daily, leading up to sort of when you want to perform. Otherwise, it's just not going to give you those endurance benefits. So don't take it intermittently. Don't sort of take it Monday, Wednesday, Friday. It's not going to do anything for you. Then the only other real one outside of that would be caffeine. I tend to prescribe caffeine doses that are a little higher than what most people would probably recommend in the fitness industry. And that's just based on my own research. There's been really solid recent studies that have shown up to 9 milligrams of caffeine per kilo of body weight, which is a massive amount. Still improves performance to a greater degree than 6 milligrams per kilo of body weight, which is still a really high dose. There's a lot of misconception about sort of adrenal fatigue and caffeine. Adrenal fatigue is complete bullshit. It doesn't exist. It's just a theory. It's been debunked heavily. But that's not to say everyone should start slamming 9 milligrams of caffeine, 9 milligrams of per kilo of caffeine every day. You still need to monitor your tolerance, start low, see how you go, and then sort of gravitate your way up if you find that you're sort of tolerating it quite well. And I will say that for the guys that I sort of prescribe those higher doses for, it's for high level athletes. It's for for boxers going to have like a really intense sparring session, like a competitive spar, or a sprint track athlete. Sometimes I'll use it for bodybuilders if they've like, usually the doses might ramp up in their high volume sort of testing weeks, pre-deload and things like that. But yeah, you wouldn't want to be you wouldn't want to be smashing 9 milligrams per kilo of caffeine just for every workout, because you want to like build your biceps up a little bit, better look good in your bathers or something like that. But yeah, I'd say for most people, 3 to 6 milligrams per kilo of body weight of caffeine is a good place to be. Start low, monitor tolerance, and move upwards. And then for competitive events, 6 to 9 is where I'll have most of my guys sitting. But yeah, outside of that, I just really don't think anything else works. And I don't think anything else is worth the time or money or financial investment. Yeah,
and that's the thing as well, the financial investment you're talking about. Like, people are paying, maybe up to $100 for, a tub of pre-workout that, like you said, like the beta alanine and all this stuff that's put in to make it feel like it's doing something. You've got a decent level of caffeine, a big hit of beta alanine to make you feel like, oh shit, this stuff's really kicked in. But in reality, it's probably not having that big of an impact on performance for the average gym goer or bodybuilder who's using it. And the thing is as well, most people who are doing those pre-workouts and stuff will probably be taking them at 5:30, 6 p.m. and it's probably affecting their sleep. And in reality, the sleep would be better than buying a tub of pre-workout, especially based on what you're saying as well.
Yeah, 100%.
Yeah, so that's a pretty cool, I know you've got a busy day, so that's a pretty cool little episode that we've got here. It's a lot into the diet stuff. It's all research-based, obviously, with you being such a high-level researcher. And I think it gives everyone a little bit of an idea on, how to implement diet breaks or refeeds depending on where they're at, and, what supplements to sort of aim their budget towards if they're into supplements and they like that whole buying the supplements. Maybe that makes them stay on track if they're taking certain supplements. So at least it's from your research-based opinion, what's actually going to provide some bang for their buck. So Jackson, thank you for that, mate. It's been an awesome episode. It's going to be up on YouTube, Apple and Spotify in the next couple of days. I'll make sure to tag you in that. But mate, just give us a recap. I know you've got some seminars coming up, and if you can throw out your Instagram handle for people to follow.
Yeah, so I've got, for the Perth Onions, presenting a seminar at Tough Team. Tickets can be bought through their website or IG. So that's going to be mid-June, and it's going to be a pretty decent half-day seminar, and I'm just going to talk about some of the undiscussed fat loss strategies. That'll be sort of the first half, and I'll discuss in more depth some of my research findings with regards to diet breaks and refeeds and whatnot. And then the second half of the seminar is going to be more so focused on muscle gain, and a lot of the strategies that I think are being poorly used by people trying to gain muscle, and a lot of the things I think are just downright stupid that a lot of people do when trying to gain muscle. So yeah, that's mid-June if you want to catch me there. I'm also speaking at the Hypertrophy Summit, which is going to be an online event. That's a stacked lineup with like Lane Norton, Mike Israel, Jacob Skeppers, Eric Helms. But I think the promo material will be coming out for that pretty soon if you just follow my IG. My Instagram is at Jackson Peos. And if you want to be a true homie, you could please subscribe to my YouTube channel, which I'm trying to build up at the moment. Basically just a lot of stuff on food, training, anime, and some education if I feel like it.
Yeah, it sounds like a good channel, mate, huh?
Yeah. I like watching it.
Yeah. Well, what I'll do is I'll put the link in for your channel in the YouTube video, so anyone who does watch this, because we get maybe about 10 to 20 people who watch them on YouTube, they can then click straight to your channel if they've watched this far, and they can subscribe to there, hopefully. And guys, if you're listening on Apple or Spotify, please follow Jackson. He does put out some really cool stuff. I shared one of his studies the other day that he shared. And yeah, it's been great having you on, buddy. Thank you for providing the knowledge bombs. And I will hopefully be catching you at Tough Team, because I did tell the guys there that I would be coming to that one. So
Awesome,
fingers
dude.
crossed we can get to that one, and we'll catch up properly then.
Yeah, for sure. No, man, it's been a good chat. Thank you.
Thanks, Jackson. Have a good day, mate. Thanks for listening to the O Show. I have been your host, Oren McCarry, and if you've enjoyed this episode, I would love it if you could share it on your social media or give us a review on iTunes. I can't wait to see you on the next episode to dive deeper into topics and guests that will supercharge your efforts in the gym, the kitchen, and most importantly, in your head. See you soon.